So in terms of monitoring, let's start out with that. So if the system's not up and running, it doesn't do us any good, right? Users have to be able to access the system. We have lots of moving parts. So as an administrator, I really need to know what's going on in the system, what's up and running. Do I have any problems? We have probably on the order of 80 to 90 microservices that I have to manage independently. So there's lots of moving parts that I have to be aware of. To help me do that, we have several tools. The Environment Manager that you've interacted with so far. So it has a nice little dashboard that we'll see. I also have command line tools. Jerry's mentioned the operations infrastructure in our ongoing conversations. These are scriptable commands that I can use as an administrator to build up my own monitoring aspects if I care to, or I can feed information to other systems if it's desired by the customer. We have a couple of things. The operations infrastructure has a series of agents that run on every machine. Those have user interfaces that I can use to monitor their tasks, the jobs that they run frequently, how do they capture metrics, how do they audit information and send it back to the server. So a lot of moving parts. Jerry mentioned yesterday that the CAS server monitor used to be there in VIA 3.3. By default, it's disabled, still available, but disabled by default. A lot of the capabilities are built into the Environment Manager now, so we really don't need too much of that, except in a couple of special cases. All right. So let's talk about Environment Manager first off. So the dashboard that we get initially gives us a good glimpse of what's going on in the system. We have in the upper left corner the availability widget. So you'll hear this referred to as the chiclet widget. It's a series of squares that represent servers, services, and instances of services. So at a quick glance, we can see what's going on in our environment across the board. If you see something in red, that's obviously bad. But we'll take a look at some of these different pieces in more detail. So the availability. If you see something in red, what would that denote? Problem, right? If you see something red, that's bad. So in the screen that you see here, you can hover over the little red chiclet and it will tell you which service is down. Right? So very helpful information. If you see something in yellow, that indicates that that machine in this case has a problem, but the machine's not down. Right? It's just something on that machine has a little issue. So red, yellow, green. Green, of course, being good. All of this information comes from the configuration server, which is under the covers console. So we're keeping track of what services are up and running. We're going to give you a very wide view of what's going on in the system. Okay? And if you just leave that thing alone, it will refresh every 10 seconds or so. So it gives you very, very much up-to-date information. In the upper right corner of your dashboard, you have something called System Health. This deals primarily with the health of the CAS server. So in this case, we have a distributed system, although it only has one worker. As Jerry said yesterday, it's not a very realistic example, but it's just one that we put together as a use case. But here we can see on the left-hand side, we have the CAS controller, which is int CAS01. And on the right-hand side, you have the worker node. And in this particular view, we're looking at the memory. So this is fairly, again, refreshes every 10 seconds or so you can get an idea of the workload of your CAS environment. If you flip over on the tab, you'll get the load average. So this is telling me kind of how the CPU is processing jobs. And one of the things that I really like about this screen is that it shows me all of the workers. So if I see a flat line graph where one of my workers is doing a lot more work than the others, that tells me I have a problem. Right? So it's just a way to kind of peek in and see what's going on in the system. Just an overview of the jobs that are running. Right? In the bottom left corner of your dashboard, you're going to have logged issues. This is going to give me an overview of the log messages that are coming through the system. So by default, it just shows me the really serious messages like the errors and the fatal messages. It just gives me a kind of an idea of, do I have any services that are in trouble? And it's by service. So you'll see different colors, lines for each one of the services that are generating log messages. Okay. So let's say I have an environment and I want to see what's going on a single machine. Right? Potentially I could, as a system administrator, log into that machine, run some operating system commands, see what's going on. But Environment Manager gives me a tab called the Machines page that allows me to scan across each individual machine in my deployment and see what's going on. CPU, memory, what services are up and running, which ones are down. We have a series of alerts in the middle of the page. So certain things that happen during the day that I want to keep tabs on. It's just a very nice way for me to, in one place, keep an eye on each of my machines. Again, I'm kind of looking for outliers here. If I scan across the machines and I see one machine doing a lot more work than the others, I know I have an issue. All right, so again, the graphs, the metrics that are captured in the graph are captured every 2 minutes. The data that gets refreshed to the display is every 5. So you may see a bit of a delay. The capturing and the cleaning of the data and the display loading to CAS takes a little bit of time. So we do have a little bit of a latency there between actual activity and what you'll see in the graph. Over time, Environment Manager has become kind of the place to go for all of this. So it started out in older versions of VIA where we needed both Environment Manager and CAS Server Monitor. The teams have worked very hard to build in the features of CAS Server Monitor to Environment Manager. So now it's the place. There are only a couple of minor things that we can do in CAS Server Monitor that we would need to bring it up for. So over time, it's become more of the one unified management interface for SAS. So if we look at the dashboard, obviously this information has to be coming from somewhere, right? Lots of moving parts, lots of services running in the background, lots of data flowing back and forth. There is a really exciting platform for administrators called the Operations Infrastructure that is creating all of this data, capturing the metrics, capturing events from auditing type events, and cleaning it up and putting it in CAS so I can report on it. So one of the things I hope you'll take from these days on administration is the power that this operations infrastructure gives you, not only what comes out of the box, but also what potential you have as an administrator to script a lot of these things if you have special needs. So really interesting. So let's break it down. So on the left of the screen, we have what we call producer commands. So these are commands that R&D provides that do things like peek at a metric. So it's like a snapshot. Tell me what the CPU is doing and report back. Tell me what the memory is doing, report back. Right? So it's just a capture of a metric at a point in time. Another type of command is a watch, which is something that I want to keep tabs on, but it's a living object. It's a log, for example. So I can have a SAS watch that looks over all of the logs in a specific directory. So if any of those logs change, tell me about it, put the message on the queue, run with it. The other one is a check, and that's more of a threshold command. So I can say, take a look at the CPU. If it's over 95%, issue an alert. Or if it's over 50%, issue a warning. So it gives me some control as an administrator to dictate where I'm concerned about a certain metric falling within its range of values. Now, all of these commands we're going to cover in great detail. You don't have to worry about setting these up. They come out of the box configured with services. So when you start the VIA environment, there's a service called, for example, the SAS VIA Ops agent that takes care of running a lot of these tasks periodically. So every 2 minutes, tell me what the CPU is doing. Every 2 hours, tell me what the auditing is doing. Right? So all of this comes out of the box. You don't really have to do anything. Although the pieces are there, you can make use of them as you wish. Really interesting stuff. Right? So for example, here we have a SAS peak where I'm looking at the CPU measurement at a level 2 depth, and I want to format the output in pretty JSON. Right? So lots of options. All of these commands are self-documenting. So if you issue SAS peak help, you'll get all of the syntax, all of the options, all of the commands syntax. But in this case, we're simply looking at the CPU utilization. Okay? So if you have any kind of command in the Linux world, you can pipe this into output. You can grep this for whatever it is you're looking for. So really interesting possibilities begin to emerge. So on the left-hand side, we had producers. Obviously, we need somebody to consume that information. So on the right-hand side of our general diagram, we have consumer commands. And ideally, the main one is SAS stream. This is a command that hooks up to the message queue, which is in the middle. And the message queue is kind of our communication method between the producers and the consumers. So the producers put information into the queue. That's all they do. They just send information over. They don't care who's listening. They just send it. The consumer commands take care of pulling information out of those queues and determining whether it's a message or an event that I'm caring about. So, for example, the stream pulls information off the queue, and it might persist that in a tab-separated value file. It might persist it in Postgres. It doesn't really matter. I don't care. It's all taken care of by the system for me. So likewise, these consumer commands do have services that dictate when they run, when they start, keeping them up and running and stopping and that sort of thing. Right. So in order for all this to work, those of you who are familiar with SAS 9, remember the SAS Environment Manager agent? Right. We have a similar construct here for the Ops agent. So on every single machine in your deployment, absent your client, you're going to have an Ops agent running. And this Ops agent is only concerned with the machine it's running on. So it's going to take measurements, it's going to run all of the commands periodically, capture the information, and communicate that back to the server so that we can aggregate it and report on it. One of your machines is going to have the Ops agent server, and that is purely dedicated toward handling the Environment Manager data mart. So it is the one that's going to do the ETL processing on all of these metrics and log information and auditing information, and aggregate it, clean it, put it in a place that we can report on it with CAS. And so there'll be just one of those. So obviously these agents do lots of things. Their job is to run periodically these tasks that they've been assigned. So in the infrastructure, we can run SAS Ops command with a tasks plugin, and that will tell me what the Ops agent is going to do. Similarly, I can run the Ops agent server tasks command and see what it is going to do. And if I do that, what you'll see is that there are up to, I think there's 16, I don't know, can't count them. But there are a lot of jobs that this Ops agent runs periodically. And on the left-hand side, you have the name of the task. The middle, you have the description. And on the right-hand side, you have the frequency. So for example, on the top line, you see that every minute, we're going to run a command that captures the CAS metrics. And all of this is configurable. So if you want to change how frequently that happens, if you want to turn it off, it's all up to you. But this is just out of the box what we consider to be important information that we're going to capture about the system. The Ops Agent server, as I said, is mainly dedicated toward the Environment Manager Data Mart, so its tasks are slightly different. You'll see things like a lot of the Data Mart ETL jobs, rolling off old data from the data tables. And the one we'll talk about in the next section is Gen Audit. So it dictates how often the auditing data is updated for CAS. So you'll become familiar with these. We'll have some exercises where you'll get to modify the frequency. You'll be able to change the configuration of some of these jobs and really decide how it is that you need the system to be set up. Now these agents are really interesting. So they come from SAS. They're all managed by command lines, but they also surface user interfaces. Now this is not documented for customers, so this is something that maybe in support you'd want to be aware of just in case you need to monitor what the agent tasks are doing independently. So there's a command there, the kill, with several options. I need the process ID of my agent, but that's about it. And what that will do for me is bring up, it will surface a UI that I can use in my browser that will allow me to do things like manage the tasks. So here I can kind of see what's going on in the agent itself. Down toward the bottom you see that there's a log for the agent. So lots of information going on about how the tasks are operating, what's been called, how often has it been called, that sort of thing. For each one of the tasks, I can see how it behaved last time. So if someone says my auditing is not updating frequently, I can go in and see how the Gen Audit task performed last. Did it have problems? I can look at the log from the screen. So lots of information presented in terms of a user interface if you're not completely comfortable with the command line interface options. And then finally we have a screen, and all of this is in one long screen. We just couldn't fit it in one screenshot. But it allows me to do things like manage the tasks for an agent. So I can disable a specific task, I can re-enable it, I can reconfigure it, that sort of thing. So again, not documented externally, but it's something that we might want to be aware of internally if you're having issues with a specific task that the agents have to run. Right. So I mentioned the SAS ops command. It's really the foundation of this operations infrastructure. And it, similar to the SAS admin command that Jerry mentioned this morning, has a series of plugins that we can use. And as you see through the list, we have lots of information we can pull out. For example, the metrics. Right? So SAS ops will allow me to plug into these information exchanges that are sharing information among all my machines. Okay? So if you take nothing else out of this class, I hope you'll look at this slide. So SAS ops logs allows me to take the log exchange. So every machine in my deployment is sending log messages to the RabbitMQ message queue. Right? This 3-word or 2-word command allows me to hook into that exchange and in real time pull off log messages in chronological order. Right? I can pipe that to a file, then send it to tech support, for example. If somebody's having a problem running a report, say, look, let me turn this on, you run your report, I'll stop it and capture those log messages, and now regardless of which machine it's on, which service it involves, I have the complete log information for that run. You guys are hard to impress, I'm sorry. Come on, that's cool, right? All right. Right, so, yep, so the question is, this could be a very large log file. Yes, that's true. And keep in mind that we're talking about potentially lots of machines, lots of services on those machines being aggregated into one file. That is true. This really has no bearing on the log files themselves. It's simply the the version of the log message that is fed into the RabbitMQ message queue. So the message happens in the log file regardless of what I do. When that log file changes, the message is put into the Rabbit exchange, and I pull it off here. So if I don't store this anywhere, it doesn't cost me anything. It's just console space. Questions about that? Yeah.
What if I want to look at the log occurred yesterday?
If I want to look at the log that occurred yesterday, I need to go to the physical log file. And we're going to talk about how to get there in just a minute. Okay. So this is real time coming through the Environment Manager kind of framework. Now you can use Environment Manager to subset log messages back 3 days by default. So if it's only yesterday, I can still get to those through the user interface. But if it's older than 3 days, by default, I'd have to go to the physical file. Okay. All right, here's another useful command. So we've talked a lot about Environment Manager and how it's useful for seeing the health of the system. What if my system won't come up enough for Environment Manager to run? Right? It happens, unfortunately. Right? So SASOps validate is a good way to see what of the framework that I need to have up and running is okay. Okay. So here we have a validate command issued at the level 3. So you can see the first thing it checks is console and Rabbit. Right? Those are the two pieces I really need for everything else to be able to communicate back and forth. If they're okay, move on to level 2, which are all my console agents, the data mart, the local file system, operations services, that sort of thing. So it won't tell me exactly what's wrong, but at least it will give me a hint of where to start looking. So if Environment Manager won't come up, this is a really useful command to have at your disposal to kind of tell where to start. Right? So we have in hands-on. We're going to switch documents now. So when you go to the exercise, be sure you flip documents to the ongoing document number 1. It's in the hands-on folder on your desktop. And we're just going to have you run some operations infrastructure commands just to get a feel for how they work. Now keep in mind that you can always run the command with the help option to see the syntax, see all the options you can add into the command. And we'll give you about 20 minutes to play with that. We're going to pick back up with logging. So we had a couple of questions about size of logs, all the information flowing through the system. One of the great things about VIA is that we're really trying as a company to become more IT friendly. So those of you who deal with IT administrators, where do administrators go to look for logs? What's the directory? var logs, right? Everybody goes there. Every software puts their logs there. Good news is that with VIA, we adhere to that standard. Now we do it through links, but regardless, we still have a position in var logs SAS where we have links to both of our VIA directory tree and our SPRI. And remember, SPRI is just kind of the foundation SAS side of things. So if you're running regular SAS jobs, those logs are going to show up under the SPRI tree. Okay. So if I look in the opsas VIA config var log directory, I will see that I have a directory per service that's running on that machine. Okay. So I still have dispersed logs, but I can get to them through that var logs SAS link. Very interesting. Okay. Now, at this point anyway, we really only have one configuration per deployment. Ultimately, that will branch out and we'll have multiple configurations. So right now we have underneath each one of the service directories a default directory that is by itself. So that's just the default instance of that service. Again, later I expect that those will have additional siblings in that directory path. Okay? So we have one path that seems a little unnecessary, but if I drill into that default subdirectory underneath a service, I will finally find all of the individual log files for that one microservice or that server. Okay? So getting through it through var logs is one option. Getting through it through opsas via config is another option. Either way, it gets you to the same physical log file. Okay. Now, if you have been talking to customers about SAS 9 at all, I'm sure you have run into a customer that has had issues with log files filling up a disk or filling up a disk share, and it causes lots of problems. So with VIA, one of the tasks that our operations infrastructure takes care of is automatic log archiving. So this job runs every day, once a day. It zips up and deletes any log that's older than 30 days. Okay. And it then takes that zip file and puts it in our root directory of our log information. So opsas via config var log is the root for all logs. Okay. So once a day, zip up all those logs that are older than 30 days, delete them from the disk, and archive them off into a zip file. Now, as an administrator, it's incumbent upon me to handle those zip files so they don't get deleted, but I need to manage those. If I need to keep them around for regulatory reasons, I can simply move those with very simple scripting. Okay. So really, really interesting stuff. We're really trying to help self-maintain the disk space utilization that we have. And by doing this, we reduce the disk space need by about 95% for log files. So it really is a big savings over time. So after about 30 days, your log disk space should settle in pretty much, assuming you have the standard workload going through your system. So much better story than we had in the past. When we have log messages, and we already saw that the environment manager surfaces log messages to me, that information reaches Environment Manager by way of the highlighted path that you see before you. So on the left, we have a SAS watch that's looking on every machine. Every machine has one of these SAS watch processes running, and it's monitoring that directory. Does any file change? If a file changes, pull the message off, put it in the message queue. And that happens continuously in near real time. Now, on the consumer side of things, the stream process is pulling those log messages off, and it's collecting that information in a tab-separated value file. And that happens about every 5 minutes. Okay? So potentially there's a lag between when the log message is generated by the producer and when it gets surfaced in CAS. So if you're looking for real-time log messages, you have to plug into your Exchange by yourself. So just want you to be aware that there's a latency there, potentially up to 5 minutes before a log message shows up in Environment Manager. Right. So as the log messages are pulled off the Exchange and they're persisted in these tab-separated value files, the Ops Agent server has tasks that self-manage those files. So there is one that zips up all those TSV files daily. It takes care of aging data off of that. So again, by default, we have 3 days worth of metric information that we keep around. After 3 days, we roll the old day off so we have room for the new day. Again, configurable, totally at your disposal. You decide what happens. But there's an opsdm admin command that's used to configure the data mart. So in this case, we're just showing you what the current settings are. And you can see here that we have CAS retained days. That's the number of days of data that I want shown in Environment Manager. So you simply have to edit that setting if you want it longer. So we looked at Environment Manager. We see that there's a logs page. I get lots of information about what's going on. So I have a graph at the top about what's going on in the system. I get filters on the left. So if I'm interested in a specific type of message, I can find it, specific type of day, or time of day rather. And then I have the messages themselves in the middle, and off to the right you have message details. So along the top, the graph will show me a distribution of the types or levels of message that I'm getting from the system. So in this case, we have things by level across the top. We have by source, so if I'm interested in which microservice is generating the message, I can drill into that. And then finally down at the bottom, I can see a trend over time. So if my system starts misbehaving, I would expect those lines to start ramping up from left to right. Now, once you have a message, obviously the user interface can't fit everything on the screen. So you can highlight a message and hit the message detail button, and it will blow up a little dialog box that shows you all of the information for that message. So things like what time of day was it issued, the source. And this is going to be really important because the source tells me which service generated the message. So when I go to find the log file, that's a very key piece of information because I need to know which directory to go to, right? I also need to know the host name. I have, in my case, 7 machines in your deployment for the workshop. How do I know which machine that message came from? Right? They're all generating logs. So the message details is the way that you're going to trace information back to the log file. So how do we do that? Right? So we have a message, we highlight it, and we get the details. Now, I know this is kind of hard to see on the screen, but if you look on your PDF, you can see this. Down at the bottom, there's a host name. So the host name tells me which machine this one message came from. So now I know where to go. I can use my MOBA Xterm. I can open a session to that server. I can then begin to go to my directory where I know all the logs are. I then use the information that I'm given in the details to go to the file that I'm given, right? So even though I see several log files in the directory, the time of day will tell me kind of which file I should start looking in. And then finally, from that information, I open the file. I can then look for message IDs or I can look for time of day. Either of those would let me get to the physical file. So now I can see the context of that one message. In Environment Manager, I see the one message in isolation. If I need to see the context to see what happened before and after, I really have to go to the log file itself to kind of see all that information. Right? So a little bit of detective work is needed, but it's not too hard once you go through it a couple of times. All right. Those of you in support, obviously we need to offer the opportunity for customers to adjust the logging level. By default, we're kind of up a little bit. We're looking at errors, maybe info, looking at things that are happening. But occasionally, if issues happen, we need to ask customers to raise the log level to a, do you say raise or lower? Anybody? You raise it? You raise it to a lower level, right? You get more information. That's a better way of saying it. Thanks. So as with SAS 9, we have the standard SAS levels. You'll notice down at the bottom there's a level of none. Where do you suppose that's coming from? Obviously, we have components in VIA like the message queue, Postgres, Consul. Those are third parties that we integrate into VIA, but they don't necessarily adhere to the SAS messaging standards. So if we can't map one of their messages to a SAS message level, we simply flag it as a none. So it's just a nice way to be able to isolate those third-party messages that we can't categorize. Okay? So How you adjust log levels differs by whether you're talking about a server like CAS, an object spawner, that kind of thing, or whether you're talking about a service like a microservice, the identities service that Jerry talked about this morning. So with servers, we still use the SAS9 way of doing things. So we have a log config XML that has loggers, it has appenders, same thing we've been doing for years. Those do require restarting the server. So if I need to adjust the log leveling for some of these things, I do need to potentially restart the server process. Right? For services though, I can go into Environment Manager and on the fly, I can go into the configurations page, I can drill down into the log level configuration, and on the fly I can flip something, in this case from info to debug. And as soon as I save that change, that microservice is now in debug mode. No restarting needed. Right? So really good stuff. Now, what's the potential problem here? You've got to put it back, right? So after I debug the problem, you have to remember to put that back to info. Otherwise, you're going to generate a lot more logging information, assuming that's not what you want. Right? So really interesting stuff. Again, for support people, I think this is going to be really interesting and really helpful. If you need, you can add an additional logger. So in our configuration, we can go to definitions. There is a logging level definition that we can define. And over to the right, you have a new button. So if the service you're after doesn't have a predefined log level, you can add one. You can define it however you want. You simply fill out the dialog and it's in place. Again, no restarting there, assuming you're talking about a microservice. Now, one word of caution here is that when you put a new logger in place, you cannot delete it through the user interface. So the best you can do is dial the level down to none if you want to turn it off. So if you've put one in that really is a deep level trace, perhaps, you're going to want to be sure you go in and turn it off. Right. So we have logs, we have Environment Manager. A lot of this information is flowing through the system. How do we report on it? Well, that's where the Environment Manager data mart comes into play. So just as we had with SAS9, we had a service architecture framework that captured information, it cleansed it, it put it into data tables so that I could report on it. Same thing here. So I have a directory. All of the data is sourced in tab-separated value files now, so no longer SAS data sets. And I think it's TSV files because those are very easy to load into CAS. CAS has an automatic loading for those. So again, by default, we keep around 3 days of information. After 3 days, we roll the old days off and make room for the new days. Don't expect you to remember this, but this is just a list of all the Environment Manager data mart tables. So you see things from audit to RabbitMQ to logs. All of these are simply tables in CAS. They're available for you as an administrator to create reports from. So if you don't like the ones that come with the system, the tables are there. Just build your own VA reports. Really interesting. So the data mart obviously needs a little bit of care and feeding. So we have configuration information. Earlier we saw the ops dm admin command, which would show me the current configuration of the data mart. So if I dump that out, I see that I have about 6 or 7 commands that are configuration settings there. If you need to change one, you simply use the same command with the set option. So in this case, we're setting the CAS retain days to 7 days. So I'll keep a week's worth of metrics in my reporting data for CAS. Okay, so again, kind of flexible. You as an administrator have the ability to dictate what happens and how often. Okay. And as far as keeping track on the data mart itself, We can use the usage plugin here to dump a lot of information out about everything from jobs that have run to clean the data mart tables to tables themselves. And down at the very bottom of this output, you'll see a number that shows you the total size of the data mart. So if customers are concerned, they can run this command periodically, keep tabs on how big the data mart is getting, and possibly adjust the configuration as they need. All right, so for some of the tasks, so in the SASOps command, we have a data marts option. That's really going to show me a lot of detail about the tasks that run to manage the data mart. So it's kind of a directory tree kind of structure. In this case, for each one of the tasks that run, I can see when it started, when it stopped, what was the return code, that sort of thing. So if you have customers who say their data mart is not refreshing, this is a very useful command to have so that you can see how the jobs that create the data mart are executing. All right, so I'm going to give you a chance to do this. So for the next 15 minutes, you're going to simply take Environment Manager, you're going to find a log message of your choosing, and you're going to go find the log file. So just a little practice for the detective work of how you go from the user interface down to the physical file.